too daunting. So this is so that you can get into that flight experience right out of the box. And it's a more kinetic style, like the way that you're moving your hand translates directly into the way the drone flies. It does not work in manual mode because I think that in manual mode, if you were trying to use kinetic controls, it would actually be, you'd be more likely to crash or end up in a bad situation.
The way I see it, it's the easiest one to fly. If you've never flown a drone before, that's the easiest one to take off and then immediately just instinctively go, okay, this way is forward, and let me turn this way.
Another benefit that's outside of regular folks, like there was a gentleman who didn't have use of one of his hands. And so it was like the first time he was able to fly a drone was with the motion control, right? Which is something I hadn't even really thought about, but it's kind of true, right? So that's a new experience for some people that maybe in the past couldn't even operate a normal remote control.
The first time I flew with one hand, I'm like, what do I do with my other hand? Like, what? This is so strange. It is a really weird feeling.
It's definitely a weird feeling. But for the people that have never used any sort of control mechanism, I think it actually makes more sense to them than a radio does. Whereas for me, it makes way less sense. It was a lot weirder getting used to the motion controller because I've been flying with a Moto 2 radio for so many years.
We also got some comments about these propellers being in the shot. So right here on the bottom and right, there's a few ways to get rid of it. One is how angled you are. So the faster you're going to fly, the more you can angle up. And right now I'm about 24 degrees. And it seems like it completely crops it out there. But now let's go into our advanced camera settings, and there's 3 image stabilization options. There's the EIS, electronic image stabilization, distortion correction, and image roll correction. Now the electronic image stabilization is the first thing I would turn on, and it's going to crop into the frame a little bit. Now it doesn't actually affect what I'm seeing through the goggles, but the recorded footage inside of the drone is going to be slightly cropped in. So even if we want to have the camera tilted down more, we're less likely to see as much of it, but it will still poke into frame. There's also the option to turn on distortion correction, which crops in a little bit further even, and in that case, it's very rare to see any propellers, and you can choose to have it apply to aircraft and goggles, aircraft only, or goggles only. I like to actually have it on just aircraft only because I like to view the wide angle on my goggles, but the recorded footage I would prefer for the edges to have that distortion removed. And then we have image roll correction, which is kind of nice because this is only a single axis gimbal. So if you're rolling like that, that's going to come across in the image. So if you're flying in normal or sport mode, then it kind of makes it look more like you're flying a Mavic, where it digitally compensates for that roll. But I wouldn't recommend using that in acro mode because you actually do see that stabilization happening in your goggles. If you're doing any sort of flips or anything like that, it's going to overly try to stabilize it until you roll enough, and then it's going to pop out. It's just strange, and also it makes it much harder to fly because you are monitoring something that is being roll corrected in the goggles. So I definitely recommend not using that unless you're flying in normal or sport mode. But the image roll correction crops in even further. So with all 3 of those stabilization options on, you'll probably never see the props. Can the motion controller and regular remote be used at the same time? Like when letting a second person fly it, and you can take over with the other controller to prevent an accident. I'm going to go ahead and assume no, but I do see what you're saying about having a second person take over because I've tried teaching people how to fly, and it's very kind of scary if they start losing control. They're like, what do I do? What do I do? But what's nice about this controller is that at any point you can be standing next to them, and if you see that they're starting to panic or anything, you just go boop, and that's it. You just let go of the controller, which you can't do with a traditional FPV drone because they don't hover. Can you use 2 goggles at the same time?
Yes, you can. So this is what's called audience mode. It works a little bit differently now than it did with the HD FPV system, where you can kind of just tap into somebody's channel. Now you actually have to turn on a setting in the master goggles to broadcast your signal, and then in the second set of goggles, you'll see that channel pop up and you can connect to it.
Now what's also cool about this is that you can also plug your phone into your goggles and you can actually broadcast through your phone, which is nice because if anyone wants to see you flying live, that's now an option. But will there eventually be an option to be able to view the screen on a phone in the other mode? Let's say you're flying a homemade FPV drone.
So the current air unit, there are no plans for that, right? Like it's things that use the DJI Fly app. So like will that work with future DJI drones that aren't just DJI FPV? Probably. Most likely that will be true, especially if they're on the DJI Fly app. But right now, for the air unit, the existing one, no plans for that.
Okay, cool, because I bought the smart controller just for that, so I didn't waste like $800. I still have a purpose for it. Sweet. Justin asks, after now having yours for some time, would you recommend any accessories out of the gate besides pop guards or anything you would have wished you got or will now be ordering? When it comes to accessories, I think accessory number one is a chair. This is a game changer. Also, the pop guards are real nice. We also have a new one, braces. So this is interesting. It's very minimalistic, so I imagine it's not going to affect flight at all. But the idea of this is to make the arms more robust, right?
It is another option to make things more rigid, right? Like if you do have a crash, especially probably a minor crash, it's going to be more rigid. And there might be cases of extreme crashes where it might not be that helpful, but you would probably be in rough shape anyway. And the feedback that I've heard so far is that it doesn't affect flight performance. So I think it could be a good option for a little bit of extra peace of mind.
I think the idea behind it is that you're distributing the energy from the impact to now spreading it between two arms instead of just one arm. Flying More Kit comes with 3 batteries, and that's, I would say, is a must. And then also there's a bag or case. Now there's plenty of bags out there that are specifically designed for FPV, which is nice because then it's modular depending on what accessories you want to carry around. It's nice. There's also some hard cases.
Yeah, I have my big FPV bag, but I believe Go Professional does make a hard case, specifically for DJI FPV.
I must say what's nice about transporting these though is how fast you can pull off the propellers, because traditionally you have to unscrew a bunch of things to take off the propellers. So these do actually fit into bags pretty nicely, or you can also take some camera bags that have the hooks on the outside so you can strap it to the back that way. But definitely get yourself a solid bag that's going to protect the elements and not bend the propellers and all that stuff. A question about the simulator. Do you know if there's any way to access the DJI FPV simulator through the DJI Fly app before owning the drone? Might be a cool way for DJI to help people into their FPV experience. Well, actually, the simulator is separate from the Fly app, right?
The app is called the DJI Virtual Flight, and it's completely free, really simple to use. When you fire it on the first time, there's a screen where it says like, well, how are you using it? And you can choose just with my smartphone. That'd be if you didn't have anything yet.
It is designed to